your hand up. Did you want to ask something? Perhaps it was an accidental hand. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our February webinar, in which we are thrilled to welcome our associates, Tony Park and Joanne Hichens. Tony, as you probably all know, is the author of 19 novels set in Africa and 6 non-fiction biographies. Joanne has edited a number of short story collections. She's written 3 crime novels, 1 shortly to be published in America, 2 young adult novels, both shortlisted for Sanlam Literature Award, and her memoir, Death and the After Parties, examines all that happens after death. The emotional frenzy, the funerals, the family strife, all of that good stuff. Okay, I'm thrilled to be running a weekend memoir workshop with Jo in March and a real writing adventure with Tony. Our week-long writing safari in June will whisk you to Vic Falls, followed by Nantwich Lodge in a remote corner of Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe. Jo, our weekend, which is coming up in March, is very nearly full, but there are 1 or 2 places still available. So just tell us briefly what you're looking forward to about that weekend.
Okay, well, I am looking forward to working with writers who are interested in memoir. I'm looking forward to really guiding writers, helping writers, assuring writers. And of course, I'm just looking forward to being in Barrydale and seeing what's offered in the town. So it's a bit of work and pleasure for me, but I do really believe in writing retreats in a sense. And I know for myself that I've often written wonderful work when I'm away from home, when I'm away from kids, when I'm away from the mundane, the routine, the interruptions, and just being in a different space can be so inspiring. So really for me, that's what a writing, I call it a retreat. It is a workshop, but in a sense, we are going to Barrydale, which is going to be away from our usual circumstances. So in fact, it is a retreat, and it's devoted to writing and devoted to memoir. And you and I, Josie, we are going to ensure that all our participants are in a safe space, that they're able to share their stories, because memoir can be very hectic, depending on the kind of stories people want to tell. And we're open to it all. And I can just assure you, between Josie and I, anyone who's still thinking of that they might like to come, we're going to look after you emotionally, but more than that, we're going to help you with the writing. We're really going to help to kickstart your memoir, or to encourage your memoir at whatever stage it is.
Fabulous. So thanks, Jo. Yeah. Okay, Tony, what are you looking forward to about the safari retreat?
Yeah, Joanne, I think who amongst us is not looking forward to travelling somewhere, maybe outside our borders sometime soon? And I think the safari in June, I'm hoping, is coming just at the right time for us to break out and do something. Nantwich is a lodge in Hwange, as you mentioned. My wife and I are part owners of it, I'll declare that. But it's an old national parks camp in Hwange that was abandoned a number of years ago through various unfortunate circumstances. But I can attest to the power of this place, because my wife Nicola and I have been visiting on and off for about 20 years, and it's in a remote location, as you mentioned. It's very scenic. The accommodation's all on a hill. It all overlooks a dam where we got a lot of game coming, and there's a lovely big old rambling house, which is the centre of the lodge, the communal area, that has the most fantastic long, wide, shady stoop where there is plenty of room to get away, just think by yourself, watch the game, get a bit of inspiration. But also it's a very convivial sort of place. And of course, you know, being on safari, there are the daily game drives. I think an important thing that I was keen to point out, and that the All About Writing people were very good to bring along, was the fact that partners are very welcome and you don't have to be the writer. I mean, my wife is not a writer and she knows what it can be like living with one. And I think if she'll be there on the retreat with me, and she'll be very happy to be going on game drives while I'm doing writing and helping people. So it's a lovely area. It's a great part of the world, super friendly. I traveled up to Nantwich in November. People are safe and orderly in Vic Falls. Certainly at the lodge, we respect all current health protocols and things like that too. I've set 4 of my novels in that part of Zimbabwe in the past, all or part. So I can prove to you, and I can definitely say that it's a great inspirational place to go. And it ticks a lot of boxes for people looking for a writing retreat. And let's face it, a break.
So, and what is it, just quickly, what that has inspired your writing? Because you do a lot of writing there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that we might talk about is place. For me, I find that as an Australian writing about Africa, although I've spent a lot of time there over the last 20 years, what helps me is to be in the place that I'm writing about and to look around me and draw inspiration from not only the scenery and the wildlife which feature in my books, but the people that I meet. You know, there's a fantastic community of rangers, many of whom are related to each other, families that have been in that park for generations. And there's a richness of stories and a richness of history in that part of Zimbabwe as well, going right back, certainly, you know, way before the colonial era, of course, but there's so much history, so much knowledge up there to draw on. And certainly Victoria Falls is one of those fantastic places to write about it, because it's populated by the most amazing, eclectic bunch of people in tourism and other ventures, and it's such a stunning location. And all those things are ingredients certainly for a novel.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tony. People have just asked about dates and things. So the memoir weekend is the 18th of March till the Sunday, the 20th. That's a weekend. And Tony, our retreat in Zim is June. Just remind me.
9th to the 16th. It's 2 nights in Victoria Falls and very nice B&B, and then 5 nights in Wangi National Park at Nantwich Lodge. And of course, if you're perhaps coming from South Africa or from overseas, it's a week, plenty of scope to do stuff afterwards if you want to stick around in Zimbabwe or do some other activities.
Okay, we are going to we will be sending out information along with a link to the recording tomorrow. So I see a lot of people are asking about costs. I think let's not, you know, go into all that now, but that information will be on the information sheet tomorrow, because I think it also partly depends, you know, yeah, on what what you're looking for, whether you've got a partner, whether you haven't, and it's too much to go into right now. So let's get on with the questions, because we had loads of questions. So we're going to try and get through them as much as we can. So I'm going to launch right in. Chris asked for your ideas on a good writing practice that has worked for you to instill good discipline to write. He finds himself jotting down ideas, but never committing to the execution. And Zaitoon asked a very similar question, many ideas in his head, but struggles to get started. So Tony, and a related question, I think they all three are very similar. Nita asks, having written well to a certain point and having a break forced upon her, how to get back into characters and story. So Tony, let's start with you and then Joe can add in.
Yeah, look, great questions, really interesting questions. And here's a boring answer for you. Routine for me. I'm the world's least self-disciplined person. And you know, when I had a full-time job, I'm lucky my full-time job as a writer here, I had to work hard at getting myself into a routine. So the short answer for me, and I know everybody's circumstances are different. Everybody has busy lives, whether they're working, raising a family, whatever. Even if you only do a little bit every day, my routine is to work 6 days a week. I have a set quota every day that I have to write a certain number of words, which for me is about 1,600 words. If I write 1,600 words a day for 6 days a week. I can churn out a novel in 6 months. Now, your quota might be 100 words or something, and it might be 5 days a week. But that, to me, to get into that routine, I find it just helps me. Another quick little tip: never finish at the end of a chapter. Never be confronted by a blank page tomorrow when you start your day's work. I always stop mid-sentence, mid-paragraph, even mid-chapter. If my quota takes me to the end of a chapter, I write the first 2 words of the next chapter, so that when I get up next day and start writing, I know where to pick up. And Lisa's question, oh, I've just been through that. I had a week off. I had my first week off in nearly 2 years of writing. I've done 6 books in the last 2 years, and it was so hard to get back into it. But one thing I would say is if you've got a certain way through your work, and you do have to have a break for whatever reason, don't spend too much time going over what you've done. Try as hard as possible just to launch back into it, because you might find that you might get a fresh take on those characters and a fresh take on that story. Maybe start with a bang, something different happening, rather than spending time going over and perhaps over-analysing what you've written in the past.
Thanks, Tony. Jo, can you add anything to that?
Yeah, look, I think, that word came up in the question, commitment. And I think for me, that is really one of the things linked to what you were saying, Tony, which is routine. You have to be committed to the writing. And our circumstances are all different. So some people might be able to write every day, and established authors will no doubt write for hours every day because they need to meet deadlines. For others, perhaps people starting out or people who've got jobs, my feeling is that you do need to find either a time every day, a couple of hours every day, or even an hour, or 1 day a week or 2 days a week that you devote to the writing. And then you commit to that writing. And to recognize as well that writing is it's a job like any other. It's a chore in a sense. Whether you're mowing the lawn or writing a book, you have to turn up to get the result. So you basically have to take the lawnmower out of the shed, put it on the grass, do your thing with it. And it's the same with writing. You've got to put your bottom on your seat, switch on your computer, get out your notebook, commit to that hour, and allow the ideas to come. And I think, one of the questions was how do I start? Is that right, Josie? How do I get going? It's a little bit like turning on a it'll trickle out, the water will gush out depending on your ideas, your openness, but the writing happens through the writing. As you write, you get more ideas. And I think a lot of people think that that writing comes magically, that you just sit down and suddenly you'll be inspired. And really it is my strong belief that the inspiration comes as you write. You commit to the writing, you sit in front of the computer, and you allow it to happen, and you learn as you go along. And when it comes to, I might differ from you a little bit, Tony. I think, for me, sometimes I'll start a book and then I'll put it down for a couple of weeks or a month, and then I'll go back to that book and I won't remember anything about the book or the characters. And so it is if I leave a novel, my own writing, and I come back to it. It's as if I really don't know what's going on in that book anymore. So I'll basically just start reading it again with fresh eyes and a notebook and see what I can pick up. Just make some notes, get a sense of the characters again, and then take it from there. So
thanks. Now, this is a related question. Sarisha asks if you've ever experienced writer's block and what you did about it, if you did. Jo, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I think I experience it every morning. I have to get out of bed and get to work. And frankly, I'd rather be on a Seychelles beach ordering a cocktail. That sounds like real fun to me. So one has to ask then, what is writer's block? I think writer's block is really that critical voice that stops you from doing things. Writer's block is the voice that says, you can't do it, you don't have ideas, who are you to be a writer, you only have an hour now. So it's all the psychological interference that stops you from actually getting on with the writing. because all writing is tapping the keys and writing, coming up with some words. You know, there are all sorts of prompts one can use. There are many ways to get into the writing. So for me, it really is about trying to understand what that block is about. Because usually if we think a little deeper, we can come to a point where we realize what's stopping us. And it's often our own judgment about what we're able to do or not able to do. And if we can just take that voice and, you know, put it in a box and put it on the shelf and promise to deal with it later, then I feel that often frees us to just get on with the writing. And then also, again, just to know that it's a job. So, you know, I can't run off to the beach and, you know, go and order croissant and coffee. This is my working time. So, yeah, how do you feel, Tony? Do you ever get writer's block? It doesn't sound like it with all your novels.
Yeah, I'm in a fortunate position where I don't get time to have writer's block. But seriously, I'll tell you, I'm super pleased we're not both saying the same things too, Joe, because it's really good to get different takes. I'll give you my semi-flippant, but actually it does work in the genre that I write in thrillers, is if I do get stuck, I have a little technique. I either kill off a character or I make them have sex. Hopefully I haven't offended anybody by saying that, but it does tend to sort of get you going again. But look, it certainly does happen. There are some days, I will be quite honest with everybody. There are some days, and this will sound terrible, but it comes back to what Joe was saying about getting the lawnmower out. I love that analogy. Some days you don't want to get the lawnmower out. Some days I will start writing with the intent of just filling my quota. Now, the only reason I will confess to that is because I will tell you the other thing, hand on heart, is when I do my first read through of my first manuscript, first draft of the manuscript, is I can see passages where I was writing, and I don't want to say it, but I would say, I reckon I'm on fire today. The words are coming so easily and I'm really enjoying this. And when I get to those sections, I think, you know what, mate, you're a bit full of yourself because it's not that good, you know. Well, I think you were a little bit too carried away. And then I'll come to some of those sections and I can chart them and map them. I might have been having a bad time. We all have bad times, you know, and it might have been really hard to write that day. And I look at it and I think, you know what, I thought that was just fill, but it's actually okay. And I think sometimes the subconscious will sort of kick in and help you. And that comes back to some of those things that Joe and I do agree on about the job, about commitment, about doing it, because trust the process is probably something. If I tattooed two things on my hands, I tattoo show, don't tell on one hand, and on the other hand, I tattoo trust the process, whatever your process is.
Thanks. Okay, let me just say, Edna and Pauline, I think your questions have been covered there as well. There were a lot of quite similar questions. Okay, Frankie, Surisha, and Liesel had questions around inspiration. Frankie's trying to write a novel after a memoir, and she says she keeps drawing from her own past experiences instead of creating a new plot. Even her protagonist keeps being me, her. And similarly, Liesel asks how much of your personal experience and emotion goes into your fiction. And Surisha asks where the inspiration to write fiction comes from. So I thought those three were similar enough to deal with together. So Tony, will you have a bash at that?
Yeah, I think inspiration is a funny word, isn't it? Because at one level it's stuff. What am I going to write about? And then what inspires me to get up and get the lawnmower out every day and to be motivated and carry on. And I mean, ideas can come from anywhere. I get my ideas from conversations around the braai. I get my ideas from reading a newspaper, talks with people that I've had. My inspiration I get also from watching day-to-day life, watching the many, many problems that people face, particularly in this part of the world, how they deal with it, how they overcome. And that's how I get that sort of level of inspiration to keep going, you know. And if you're writing about yourself, that's not a bad thing. Look, there's a great adage. You know, some of these old adages are there because they work. Write about what you know. Draw on your own experiences. We've all lived. We've all loved. We've all lost. We've been in situations of stress. We've been in situations of happiness. If you're writing about your own feelings, but maybe you're sharing those experiences and feelings around a couple of different characters, there's nothing wrong with that at all, because that's the old story, you know, person meets person, falls in love. Sometimes there's problems, there's loss. Draw on your own emotions and feelings. It'll make your characters so much believable. And what I do is I never base characters on real people's stories. But one of those books I said at NAP, which is called African Dawn, and it's all about the troubles and strife in Zimbabwe from the 1950s right up to the present time. There are so many gut-wrenching true stories in that book from friends of mine. And I wrote that book because a friend of mine who was a farmer who got kicked off his farm in the land redistribution program, he said, Tony, please won't you write one of your storybooks about us to tell people about what's going on. That's incredibly powerful when someone gives you the permission to use their story. So draw from yourself, be inspired by what you've been through and what your friends and family have been through. Share it out so it's not just you amongst your characters. All your characters will experience or have experienced all of those emotions that you've experienced in your life from the time you were a little kid.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I agree with you. And in a sense, I think it's absolutely inevitable that we use our own experiences and our own personality traits because we know them so well. So they are going to creep into our characters. And I think it's also inevitable that the better we know our fictional characters, the more they begin to take on a life of their own, depending what they are doing, what the actions that they're taking in the novel. So one needn't fear that this is going to be a facsimile of oneself in a sense. But it can be really helpful to use one's own experience. And I'm now speaking from my personal point of view. The memoir I wrote basically revolves around deaths in my family, and particularly, I would say, the death of my husband, who died of a heart attack at age 52. But when he died, and before I wrote the memoir, I was busy with a crime novel, and I found that all those incredibly intense feelings of loss and isolation and loneliness fed into the work, and I started to create these characters who were very dark. And I because I really understood that emotion, I really hope that those characters are authentically drawn. So whatever one's experience is, it can come in handy with the writing. So don't be afraid if you think, oh well, I'm writing about myself here, because your character will develop as well. Yeah, and talking about inspiration. Yeah, what is inspiration? That is such a good question. Inspiration can merely be the sight of the sunrise, getting up in the morning, seeing a beautiful flower in the garden, something that inspires us to get on with our day, get on with our work. It might not even be writing related. But I think it is the sense of wanting to do more and recommit. So recommit to life, recommit to writing. Inspiration for actual writing, listening to people, sitting alongside people at restaurants, hearing what they say, seeing someone in a zany outfit and surreptitiously, photographing them, dreams. And of course, the more inspiration, or the more you write, the more inspiration happens through your own writing. You become inspired through your own writing, because as you learn to know your characters better, as they do the unexpected, you're inspired to take them forward onto the next page or into the next action. So so I think, inspiration can come from many places. I would say that a lot of younger writers wait for inspiration. They wait for the muse. They expect it to somehow come down like manna from heaven. They sit in front of the computer and they say, yes, but I'm not inspired. I don't feel inspired. And I think it's erroneous to think that inspiration is like a lightning bolt that is suddenly going to just fill you up with marvelous ideas and you're now going to write your bestseller, in a week. Could happen, but the possibility is that it is not. So inspiration is simply the desire to keep on going and to discover the story as you move forward. Don't wait for it. create it yourselves and use your experience, whatever it is.
Thanks, Joanne. Okay, now we had a lot of questions about preparation. Jill and Liesel asked about character development and research. How much and how long do you spend on it? Ricky Lee asked about story planning. Renee asked about world building. And Kathy asked if there's a formula for best-selling genre fiction. So that's, you know, all to do with preparation for writing. So Joe, I think it's your turn to launch in first, and then, yeah.
Okay, all right. Preparation, was that for preparation for writing characters, or?
Yes, so different people asked about different forms of preparing to start writing, the developing the characters, the amount of research, the story planning, the world building.
Okay, so all the secrets in one go. How to write
all
a
the
novel
secrets in one go. Yes.
Different people start novels from different places. Tony, you mentioned how important place is to you, that you come back to South Africa, you feel the essence of it. I can just imagine you sitting in the camp, feeling the heat, hearing the hyena at night, perhaps even being fearful that the hyena is going to get through the hole that you've just seen in the fence, or whatever it is. Other writers have a character that they would like to explore. I wrote a short story recently about a gentleman who lived in a shack, and his family was part of the looting in Durban. South African people on this Zoom chat will know what I'm talking about. But that, to me, I wanted to get into the interior of the character. I wanted to know what he was thinking, what he felt. I really had to put my shoes into, put myself into the shoes of this character. So I think it really depends. How do you get into a story? You might even have overheard a snatch of conversation, people talking about their sex lives or whatever. I know someone had a question about sex, which might come up later. But, you know, something, again, that interests you. And that's when we go back to inspiration, because that's really what it is. It's something that you as a writer are interested in, whether it's place, character, story, a conversational thread. And that is generally how one starts, or that is how I start. I'm a bit of a pantser. So for those of you that know the phrase, it is, I just, you know, I fly by the seat of my pants. I sit at the computer and I'll write a few paragraphs and I'll start to feel what's right for me. Other people prefer to plot. They know that they've got a character. They know that there needs to be a murder in the first 10 pages, etc., and they begin to plot the action. So I think, again, it speaks to personality, what kind of person you are, what kind of writer you are. So that is really how to get into the writing. And then preparing character and story. I think I can say this about it all, and plot. You cannot know it all at once. It's an incremental discovery. As you go along, you learn more. And I think even for people who plot quite carefully, those people discover their story, they discover what their character is capable of as they write that character. I mean, even let's say you have a serial killer. That serial killer is going to up the ante as the book progresses, and you as the writer might be surprised at what that serial killer is prepared to do to his victims, and you would not have known that before you actually started writing the story. So to kind of wrap it up in a nutshell, it's kind of having some idea, wherever it comes from, the commitment, the openness to really experiment and to allow the writing to happen, developing that character. And this is something that we talk about a lot in All About Writing, is that plot is often, plot comes from character, story comes from character. It depends on who your character is and what they're prepared to do, and story often follows. If you have a real nasty guy, he's going to do nasty things, and one nasty thing is going to follow on from another nasty thing. So yeah, I would say I hope that's kind of answered some of that. And shall I give over to you, Tony? You can kind of add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Jo.
Yeah,
I think sort of unfortunately, I'm going to say the same as you, but I'll just deal with that briefly because I'm also a pantser. I've got friends. Some of my best friends are plotters, right? So I can't plot. But look, I do no preparation at all whatsoever. I start with a premise. My last book, Blood Trail, is about. I spoke to a friend of mine who's an academic researching the use of muti, traditional medicine, by poachers who will buy a spell to make themselves invisible when they go hunting rhinos. And that's how strong their belief system is. So I said, book about poachers using muti, poacher disappears, like really disappears. How can that happen? And off I went. Now I find that, just as you said, Jo, I'll deal with this part very briefly. Same thing, plot comes from the character. The story will evolve as far as I'm concerned. What I will say to people when I give that answer is there are no shortcuts. So I will write a book with no plot, just begin with a premise. So there's no character development except what happens organically as I write. And my first draft, because I don't stop and reread until I finish first draft, is very, very rough and wonky, and it goes all over the place, and there's terrible continuity issues. So I spend a lot of time fixing that up. My plotting friends will turn out a pretty well-formed first draft, but they've spent more time plotting. So this is not about saving time. I think for those people, going back to one of those first questions about how I get started, just do it. Just start. Instead of jotting your idea down on a piece of paper, type it, make it the start of a novel. I'll hone in on something that came up. Research was part of that question, because that's something I like to talk about. Again, research is the greatest time waster of all. It is the best excuse to procrastinate. And I've everything I've learned, I haven't had any formal training, everything I've learned is on the job. I wrote a book called African Sky, set in the Nantwich area in Zimbabwe during the Second World War. I love planes. I'm a plane nut, and I like the Second World War. I went to aeroplane museums. I read every single book there was that was written about the Empire Air Training Scheme, where Aussies and Kiwis and Brits and South Africans learned to fly in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, during the war, and I became an instant expert on it. And 90% of my research material was cut out of that book by a very canny editor who got rid of it all. So I learned my lesson there is that you can become too sidetracked by research. So what I do is I write a book and I don't do any research as I go. I get myself in the right direction, and then I write my manuscript. If I don't know something historical, if I don't know something contemporary about a weapon or how to fly a helicopter or a piece of kit, or a job, I just put the word check in bold, in brackets in it, and I continue writing. When I get to the end of my first draft, I do my first edit. Sometimes I don't need those particular facts or pieces of information. They're cut in the first draft. So then, once I've done my sort of semi-workable first draft, I do my research retrospectively. I'm sorry to say this for the researchers because it can be quite fun. So I'll go back and I will ask a helicopter pilot how to conduct an emergency landing. That's it. I don't need to know everything about the helicopter or how to fly it. I don't need to know what happened in this period of history in South Africa, but I need to know what it was like at this place in this particular time when this happened, or what's it like to stitch someone up or give someone a blood transfusion in the field. So what I find then is, to research, I find people, not the internet. So I'll go online, I'll find an expert in the field that I want to know about it. I will email them out of the blue. And in 20 years, only one person said no, because I find people are very giving and like to help, and people like to talk about their jobs. And I'm not wasting their time, because I'm not how to be a surgeon. I'm asking how to put 4 stitches in someone's arm. So that's my take on research. I do it retrospectively. I'm 100% on board with what Jo was saying, because I am a pantser, is that things like character development and even world building, whether it's a real or imagined world, let it come, let it happen. Because as Stephen King says, in all of these things, whether it's research, in his very good book on writing, whether you're talking about research or describing somewhere or putting somewhere in a particular place and time, a few well-chosen details will stand for the rest. So you don't want to waste too much time on research, even though it is such fun.
Okay, thank you. Here's a very practical one from Zaitun, who struggles with dialogue. So how to make your dialogue flow?
Yeah, do you want me to kick off that one, Josie?
Oh, sorry, Tony, I think that's you this time.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So look, I used to work as a journalist on local papers like your suburban or community newspapers in Australia and the UK. And I don't think that being a journalist really helps you that much if you want to write fiction. You know, it helps me with my nonfiction a little bit. But one of the best things I think it taught me was listening to people and having to translate their words in an interview into the written word. So I would say maybe be like a journo, Zaitun. I mean, maybe with the consent of some friends, sit over in a corner and make some notes about a conversation, any conversation, whatever they're talking about, because then you'll find the patterns of people's speech, their turn of phrase, where they contract a word, where they don't, what emphasis they put on their words. And this is what you do as a journalist when you interview someone. You're always listening out for that really good bit. And then you have to do your damnedest to report it correctly. So you make notes. And it can be difficult because people don't talk in complete sentences. They tail off. But you can work that into your dialogue, and you can use that to build tension maybe, or to show attraction or love through body language as well as dialogue. So that's where it helps to become like a professional people watcher and a listener, and maybe make a few sneaky notes. You know, I'm not telling you to go out and record people without their consent, but listen and learn, you know, and it's not easy, but good dialogue is so important. And I have seen many an excellent story, cracking yarns are let down by kind of maybe the dialogue is too stilted or formal, or they don't use enough contractions. You don't have to use too much slang, don't have to use too much swearing, you don't have to use too many contractions, but all of these things are part of how people talk. And I think if you can develop an ear for how real people talk and make that a little project, you know, to pretend you're interviewing someone and then you're having to write down what they said, because I think that's the main thing that helped me from my time as a journalist.
Yeah, and then, you know, just to add to that, a lot of dialogue, a lot of what people say to each other in everyday parlance is actually quite tedious. I mean, you know, you must listen out to a normal conversation. Hi, how are you? I'm okay. Did you have a good day? Oh, not really. And what about you? And it can go on that way and on and on. And what we have to do as writers is condense those conversations. We've got to take out the good parts, so that in the novel or the memoir, the dialogue actually means something and it moves the story forward or is clever in some way. So just bear in mind that you're not merely recording someone's dialogue. You're creating dialogue as well. You're finding the words to make clever dialogue. So it's not about just having an ordinary conversation. A written dialogue is different in that way from a normal ordinary conversation, which can sometimes be very ambiguous and go from one subject to another. You know, if we had to read that in a book, we'd lose our audience. And something useful as well is to read your own dialogue aloud. Listen to the rhythms of it. And think about the characters as well who are saying certain things. Would this character speak like this? Does the character have an accent? What kind of education level is the character? What are the character's personality traits? What is he interested in? Is he always talking about cars? Does he always talk about women? You know, so what is the content of that dialogue as well? And then how to use that dialogue. But yeah, I agree. It's a really important aspect of writing, and something that people really need to pay attention to. So,
thank you.
Yeah, next question, Josie.
Okay, so now we have an interesting one, which is going to hit you first. Tembelani asked about dealing with sexual content and how much detail is too much, how much is too little, And is it wise to try and educate about the difference between male and female pleasure points?
Ooh, okay. Well, I want to go back to something that Tony spoke about earlier, which is research. And research basically being a waste of time, or not a waste of time, but largely unnecessary till the point you've finished the story. People read for emotion, they want energy in the writing, clearly they want a story, but I don't think many people want to be educated. If they want to be educated, then they will turn to nonfiction or self-help book. But in fiction particularly, you want a strong emotional, impactful story with strong characters. So why I'm talking about this is I think it would be a mistake, is it Tembalani, to try and educate anybody about sex in whatever it is that you're writing. I think the sex should unfold naturally as part of the scene. And Tony, you were also saying certain details suffice. One could write pages and pages of, how the man should hone in on, the clitoris, or the other way around. And perhaps in some writing that might be necessary. But I think in fiction, less is traditionally better than more. And if we wanted more, and if we wanted education, particularly about sex, then we'd go and peruse Dr. Eve's sex manual. So I think put two characters together in a bed or on the couch or wherever they happen to be, and they can have foreplay and touch and whatever it is, but they must do it because it's going to move the book along. It's an important scene. You're going to create it consciously in the same way you create every other scenes. I'm just thinking of violence as well. One isn't going to describe every stab blow to a body because the reader just would not be able to cope with that. And I think it's the same with sex. So it basically comes down to what details are you going to present according to what the characters would do, and how does one create a scene that is believable, that holds the interest of the reader, and that is not necessarily to educate the reader, or I would say certainly not to educate the reader. Sex is tricky. A lot of people overwrite sex. She held his giant member in her hand and felt its heat emanate until the final volcanic explosion. I'm just giving an example of what we don't want to do with sex writing. And of course, there is erotica, which is focused on sex. So if you're writing erotica, yes, you will have to be really looking more closely at sexual content. But it's always how to write it sensitively, how to write it believably, how to write it erotically, without it becoming a comedy of errors, or something that the reader just says, oh, this is way too over the top, or way too crude, or yeah. So good luck with that. All of you who are writing sex scenes, it can be tricky.
Yeah.
Tony, do you do sex in books, or do you just
I do. No,
Yeah.
I do. In fact, sex and violence. But it's funny because two things I've learned. One thing I've learned is you can never please all of the people all of the time. Absolutely. Someone will always criticize you, maybe too much, maybe not enough. I had an elderly lady come up to one of my book talks in Australia, and she says to me, I love your book. She said, oh, that's very nice. I said, thank you. She said, do you want to know why? And I'm like, okay, why? She says, because someone always gets killed in the first chapter and there's heaps of sex. So I think you have to know your audience. But I always say, I love my audience and my readers. I don't write for them, I write for me. So I am my biggest critic and I am my censor. And I think my views change over the years. I think a couple of things, I would endorse absolutely everything Joe said, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but I think you have to be aware of society and norms and the time that you're writing in. I picked up and reread for fun a book that I read when I was a teenager from the 1970s, and I think it was the most popular book in our school library because it did have quite a bit of sex in it. I don't know how it slipped into the Catholic school. But when I read it, I was quite frankly shocked. It wouldn't have got past my editor today. It's what was considered the norms and the attitudes towards women exactly in the book and how they were portrayed. It just wouldn't get published today. So I think write what you like, write what you know. This is one of those areas that you can talk a little bit about in there. Less is more. Few well-chosen details stand for the rest, as Joe recapped, and be acutely aware of what is acceptable and what is not today. And I think you would apply that, as Joe mentioned, to things like violence and perhaps anything else that you're writing about. So be sensitive, I guess, is a good thing to do. I certainly say don't. I would never say don't do it. I think a lot of my readers, I think maybe they do like it. Maybe that's why they read my books. Who knows?
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hop to a question which relates to two that have popped up in the chat. So Dave asked, are there any ethical restrictions when writing a novel inspired by true story? He feels sure he's going to offend at least someone in the family. And then we had in the chat, Sunel says, I work in disaster fire field. Must I ask permission from my work to write about the experiences? And Dominic, this is more it's very similar, but more aimed at memoir. And this was aimed at you, Joe. Do you think your memoir would be different if your subjects / characters were still present? Would you feel more reserved if your characters could read what you've written? I think those three questions are all quite similar, but I'm going to throw that first to Tony and then you can pull it.
Look, it comes up because I do write a bit of nonfiction, and even if you write a novel based on people, if you're writing something that is based on your family, I know if it's my family, I'm sure as eggs going to offend someone without a doubt. It's a dangerous path to walk down. I think you've got to be brave, and you've got to make a conscious decision whether you do that, because unless you write something that's like really fluffy and you have a kind of what we would call in Australia a Brady Bunch type family, if you remember from those days, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be strife. And so I think I think that's just a personal call. I always think to myself when I'm writing a non-fiction book, I do a lot of ghostwriting. I find one of the things that happens when you're doing a non-fiction project with someone else, that first interview you do with them, that first draft is very cathartic. People do tend to start unloading and even perhaps if not wanting payback, wanting to put their side of things. And then what I have to do with them when I've done that first draft is step back and ask two very important questions. How would you feel if someone wrote that about you? And if you said, I can take it and it's 100% true and it really, really happened and it's integral to the story, then that's okay. Because my second question is it integral to the story? That is the biggest test. If you're writing about what Uncle Fred did, which was not quite nice, just because you want to get back at him or you don't like him, that's probably the wrong reason to be doing it. If it's a linchpin key moment in the story of your life or the story of your fiction based on a family, loosely based on your own, is it advancing the story? Is it that important? And how would you feel if someone wrote about you? Could you take it? But I guess I would caveat on all of that is if you're going down this path, you've got to be brave. For the Sunel, I think who asked about your work, I write quite a bit of military nonfiction in Australia. And look, we have rules about that in Australia in our military about what you can and can't write, and you're supposed to get everything checked. I think that's overly controlling and I don't tend to pay much attention to it, but I'm not telling you to get in trouble with work. I think you would apply those same principles that I just mentioned. And if you're going to work about your workplace, if you're writing something critical, when it comes to libel and the legal aspects, truth is the best defense. If what you are writing about something that happened that is 100% absolutely verifiable true, and you can prove that or that, then it's probably something you can write. And I dare say it's probably been written before. If it's hearsay or you don't know something, be very, very careful. And I generally find that when people write a book about their workplace, even if it's a bit critical or a bit tell-all, it tends to be really well read in that workplace. And I think I would like personally to see more stories of the amazing frontline work that the people are doing in the emergency services in South Africa. I write quite a bit of it in fiction, but I'm working on a book about rangers involved in the fight to protect the rhinos coming out later this year. I think for the history of this country, some of that stuff should be written and is worth telling. That would be my 2 cents worth on that, or my 2 rands worth on that. Jo, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And I mean, that sounds really exciting. I mean, your work, but as well, I mean, the story of the writer who wants to write about, is she dealing with fire? Is that what you said, Josie?
Yes,
yeah,
fire
some
and
sort of
yeah,
frontline
and
worker.
disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think often, whether it's that sort of story or a memoir, writers often want to go and get permission first from their family, from their work, whoever. And I think I would suggest that you just put that aside. If you want to write the story, allow the story to develop, write the story, write whatever you need to write. Even if your little voice is saying, oh, you know, my mother will just die on the spot if she reads this, or, you know, my boss will fire me. It is still your story. It remains with you. It's your intimate work. Nobody else is reading it as yet. So don't restrict yourself. Don't censor yourself. Write the story you need to write the scenes you need to write, develop the characters that you're interested in. And once you've done the work, you know, perhaps worked with an editor or various readers, you can then decide to tone it down or take out various scenes that, as Tony said, do not move the story forward. Because remember, whether you're writing memoir, nonfiction, fiction, it's always about moving that story forward. How to get the reader to turn the pages. So a book is, in a sense, a construction. You're not going to put everything into it. You're going to put in key scenes that fit together, that keep moving the story forward to some denouement, some climax, where your characters become different people, or they figure out who the killer is, or whatever it is. Yeah, offending family. Tony, yes, one has to be very brave in this field, because you will offend someone. You know, you might write a scene in a book and someone will come to you and say, you have stolen my life. Meanwhile, you've never even met this person before. It can be, you know, as arbitrary as that. If you're writing memoir about your family, some family members might certainly object, particularly if one wants to write a memoir that is truthful. And my memoir, I wanted to write a truthful memoir. Something that happened while I was writing the memoir is that I realized that my feelings of loss were rooted in the way I was brought up as a child. So I began to write about my childhood, which involved my siblings. And I allowed myself to explore that. I didn't know if it was going to be part of the book or not, but it was ultimately. And yeah, and I know that there are things there that a couple of my siblings have found difficult. But I think, was it Mary Kerr who said, if you got to live it, you get to write it. It is your story. And clearly one doesn't want to hurt people. One doesn't want to offend people. But if you're going to tackle memoir and you're going to tackle difficult subjects, the chances are people will be offended. I'm just thinking of Augustine Burroughs, Running with Scissors, who wrote about his family. Off the wall psychiatrist, father, I think it was, I can't remember exactly, but you know, his family members sued him. So, you know, yeah, none of us want to get sued, but do you want to write something authentic that feels true to who you are? And if you do, then you certainly might be offending people. But again, write the story. And then I think, Tony, it's true. Sometimes scenes creep in that are revenge memoir, or, you know, you just want to teach someone a little lesson. And you've actually got to cut out those scenes. You're at the service of the story, at the service of the book. But that only happens at a later stage. So I would really say, whatever you're writing, just give yourselves the permission to write it. You don't need permission from anybody else. You know, once you start publishing, or in the editing stage, you can then consider permissions and look at those finer details and the sensitivity You know, I think there are things called sensitivity readers these days, particularly with young adult fiction, because of our kind of very wide gendered youth population. So, you know, but all those things can happen at a later stage. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say on that. How are we doing for time, Josie? Is there?
We've got 5 minutes.
Okay.
I thought we would jump to the finishing and publishing questions. There were a lot of questions which were all very similar. So we're going to try and answer them all at once. Jill, Charles, Peggy, and Renee all asked things about agents and editors, how important they are, and also the right time to submit a manuscript, after many drafts, after a first draft, or once you know where your story's headed. Okay, Jo, do you want to start, or shall I throw that?
Yeah, sure. Look, I don't know much about agents, so I think Tony will deal with that.
Yeah.
Agents, what was the other thing? Editors, I find are absolutely crucial to writing. And just broadly, one has a structural editor who will read for structure, to see how you can, you know, perhaps change paragraphs or scenes around to create a more powerful story. Content editors who look at the content, who ensure the credibility of the content, line editing, copy editing, people who read specifically to pick up spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes, and then just to jump to when is the right point to deliver a manuscript to a publisher. I would say, and this is in my experience, try and write a manuscript that is as good as it's going to get. Because these days, I think there are so many manuscripts being sent to agents that they're really looking for something that they can that's going to jump out at them and say, wow, this is a great piece of work. But if you send something half-baked, it's just going to stay on the slush pile. So I would say, spend rather a longer time than rushing through something. I would also say get the help you need. And it's interesting to me, a lot of writers don't particularly want to go on courses. They don't want to pay for editors. But if you're investing in your work, you're investing so much time in your writing, I think it's also worth investing in an editor, in readers, in doing a course, understanding the elements of style. How does character develop? What is setting? How do I create a sense of place? You know, some writers are lucky, it comes to them naturally or more naturally. Other writers can learn this. And I really do believe that we can all learn how to write better. So Tony, I'm going to go to you. Agents, publishing, all of that.
Yeah, I think Jo covered most of the important things there. One thing I'll say about agents, and I always say this to people, is exhaust every opportunity open to you before you go looking for an agent. I got published off the slush pile, as they call it in Australia, an unsolicited manuscript, because my publisher happened to be looking for a mass market fiction set in Africa, fiction novel set in Africa. I didn't know that was the case. And then later on, after 4 books on, I thought I'd better get an agent to get some overseas deals. And it was harder for me to get an agent than it was to get published. If you've got a good manuscript, it's the best manuscript you can do in your own ability, or maybe with a little bit of help, as Jo said, let it go. Another couple of things that I've picked up from publishers, if you do get a publishing, it's not easy, you're not likely to get a deal for one novel. They probably want to know you've got at least another one in you. So as quick as you can, even while you're still maybe tinkering around with that first one, get stuck into a second one, have something else on the go. And I think one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make is they'll spend 5 to 10 years working on that first manuscript. It's too long. I think the best use of money you can possibly do, because say you don't get a commercial publishing deal and you want to self-publish, if you want to spend some money, certainly courses. Yes, I agree with that, particularly the writing safari and the memoir course. But I would also say, if you want to invest some money in a reputable, proper, experienced editor. because say you don't get published and you want to self-publish, where most self-published books fall down is they have not had a professional edit. So that would be the only other suggestion I would make. I would concentrate on that more than trying to find an agent, because it's damn hard. It's as hard, if not harder, to get an agent to take you on as it is to get a publisher to take you on.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you both a very quick couple of personal things that came from people, and we'll just answer these very quickly. So do you try to be more to be original or to deliver to readers what they want? And what is the book you're most proud of? Tony?
Yeah, great question. I always turn in relation to that first question. I'm sorry to say I write for myself. I think my readers are like me, a lot of them, and hopefully we all enjoy the same sort of stuff. So being original, yes, I want to surprise myself. I want to get a twist that I didn't see coming. I'm writing to, when you write, you should enjoy it, right? It shouldn't be that hard. It's not easy every day, but I write for myself because I really enjoy it. That's the most kind of thing. I think the book I'm most proud of, look, that's a tough one. Probably my first one, because it changed my life. I got published when that book came out when I turned 40. My life began again when I'm 40, and I'm so grateful to my wife, who supported me through all those countless hours and months and weeks, and supported me, let me leave a very good full-time job to have a crack at writing, and my family, my mum and my mother-in-law, and I'm proud of everything they did to help me get that book published. And it's my life, and I have to pinch myself every day when I wake up. I'm living my dream.
Fabulous. Thanks. Jo?
What a beautiful dedication to your family, Tony. Thanks for that. Yeah, look, I also write for myself. I kind of like to keep the reader in mind, but I find if I'm not writing to explore my own issues and my own interests, then it falls flat somehow. It's got to be meaningful to me. And I suppose I'm talking particularly about memoir. I think at the moment I'm most proud of my memoir, Death and the After Parties. Yeah, and I've started another memoir. And what I realize is, and I think it was Joan Didion who said it just a little while ago, that she writes to understand better who she is. And I think I'm trying to do the same. I'm writing to understand who I am, what my place is in the context in this world. That's what memoir gives me, because it's about real life. When I write my crime fiction, sure, I want to have fun, and I miss it, actually. I want to get back to it, because you can really go to town, and whereas memoirs about me and my angst and my joy too. When I do crime, I can just put that all aside and go and kill some people, and just have a great time. And even that, I think, is for myself. And I write what I call humorous crime fiction. I mean, it's not ha-ha funny, but it's probably, it edges towards Carl Hichens type style. And it gives me a chance to just to kind of laugh at the world. So yeah, there we go. And then hopefully it'll resonate with some readers somewhere. I think if one tries to write merely for the reader, who is the reader? There are so many different readers. All of us like different genres, different authors, different styles. So you have to be true to yourself as a writer. And yeah, I'm just looking at the time. That's probably,
yes.
Yeah, because we could go on. There's so many more questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tony and Jo, for joining us. And thank you, all of you, for joining us. I hope we'll see you all on the writing safari, and a few of you, because there aren't that many spaces left, on the Barrydale Memoir Weekend. Yes, thank you all. You will all be getting a link to the recording, and we'll give you a lot of information in that as well, about the things you asked about, the workshops, the retreats, and the courses. Thank you all very much. Hope you'll join us next month. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thanks, Josie, and thanks, Tony. Lovely to chat.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Josie. Sorry about my appalling lighting, but thanks for all your great questions. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.